taking a little trip down memory lane here, a little happy birthday episode to my co-host Matt Williamson for his 50th birthday. How did he get to where he is? His journey from scouting in college, in the NFL, recruiting, ESPN, to now being a podcaster on, in my opinion, one of the best shows that exists on the planet, covering the National Football League on today's Peacock and Williamson.
NFL analyst Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson bring you expert NFL analysis every day in less than 30 minutes. Get an inside look into the NFL on the field and in the front office. With elite breakdowns, next-level analysis, and in-depth information only for the real NFL fans. This is Peacock and Williamson, and it starts now.
Welcome to the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show. Brian Peacock alongside Matt Williamson at BD Peacock at Williamson NFL. Thanks everybody for making us your first listen on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Shout out to the Everydayers. We appreciate you. Make sure you're subscribed up on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcast. This is a fun little episode, Matt. We're recording this a day early, so you have the day off on Tuesday, which is your birthday. So first of all, happy 50th, Matt. And I'm excited to hear about your journey and how we got here, because you've done a lot of, you've worked yourself out a nice little career. And last week during the mailbag show, you were kind of asked about advice about how to get into scouting. And so I think we can talk a little bit more about your journey and how you got into scouting and how it's formed your career.
Yeah, and it's a very unorthodox path. And most people have very different stories and whatnot. And like you said, we're recording this Friday. I'll be down to Steeler OTAs tomorrow, Tuesday, on my birthday. I'll be a little disheartened if Coach Tomlin doesn't have the whole team sing happy birthday to me. I mean, I would assume that's in the cards. We'll see.
Yeah.
Let you know on Wednesday.
If there's any breaking news Monday or Tuesday that we didn't get to, that's why, because Matt's got the day off for his birthday, or at least the day off from this show on his birthday. But I mean, do we got to go all the way back to Dayton, Ohio?
I mean, might as well. I mean, on a beautiful June 6th day in 1973, there was a comet across the sky, and shepherd and wise men came to the manger, and
and they presented Mr. and Mrs. Williamson with the child and said, well, he's not going to be an athlete, but guess what? He's going to be athlete adjacent.
Yes, and much like your parents, you will have very little athletic ability, but you will be much taller, and people will think maybe you were a tight end or something along those lines. I'm just under 6'3", 6'0", to be exact, and tipping the scales at too big a number. But I mean, you could see why someone might think, oh, you must have played in high school. Well, you should see my parents' athletic ability. You would never think that's the case whatsoever. You're the athlete on the show, not I.
Are you converting from tight end to offensive tackle? Is that what you're trying to say?
Not athletic enough for pass protection either. Okay. So backup quarterback, maybe third string tight end, do the dirty work, maybe kickoff team, something like that. Return team, maybe, but definitely mind of a coach or scout much more than body of an athlete. So no one cares about where I was born and all that, but both my sides of the family are Pittsburgh through and through. They're both from Brookline, which is kind of a working class, old school Steeler, old school Pittsburgh neighborhood. My parents met when they were like 6 years old and have been together ever since. And my first 2 years of existence were in Dayton, Ohio, and under 2 years between my time in the Browns and Akron are the only years where residence was not in Pittsburgh, and they were all within 2 hours driving anyway. So I haven't gone far from the nest, so to speak. I mean, Pittsburgh through and true. Right.
And you were, we'll get to your ESPN days. And by the way, OG podcasting days too.
I got a prop today.
A deal?
Look at this sucker.
Yeah.
How about that? I mean, anyone watching on YouTube, a fine gentleman sent several of these to us ESPNers, 20 years ago. So I'm sure there's a woodworker out there that could come up with a Peacock and Williamson one. You only have to make two. You know, send you the shipping address, and this hangs down in my bar. So one of the first podcasts ever. We'll talk about that in a while because it's crazy. And in a way, it's one of my favorite, biggest regrets, but also one of my best opportunities.
Just the podcast game that didn't exist when you started on your football journey. When did you put working in football. Like my career could be, I can make a career around the NFL, clearly not playing in it, but I can make a career around the NFL. When did that pop onto your radar?
Well, let me give you a small backstory. And again, I'm not tooting my own horn, but it is an interesting story. If you were born in 1973, basically in Pittsburgh, you're a Steeler fan. I mean, like super Steelers. Like the first game I remember watching was the Rams Super Bowl, their 4th victory. I was like 7-ish. But my parents, aunts, uncles, I mean, they traveled to Super Bowls. It was a perfect time to grow up Steelers because they were the dominant team of the 70s. I mean, kind of like your Niner experience probably through the 80s. Like this is a dynamite, transcendent team after being bad for the whole history of the organization until Chuck Noll takes over. So when I'm like, 10 to 15, I'm calling into radio stations, giving some advice on Steelers. I'm writing with regularity handwritten notes to Chuck Noll, Tony Dungy, the defensive coordinator. Back then, there's no internet, so like any magazine I could get, Mel Kiper's book or any kind of preview magazine you could get, I would just be plastered to it, read cover to cover, time and time again. So it was a passion that was kind of thrust into me because of the time I was born in this city. The city was all black and gold all the time, so everyone was a huge Steeler fan. And I just kind of took it a step further, to be honest, like a lunatic.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's perfect when the team that's nearest to you that your family enjoys is winning titles.
Yeah.
I mean, it's impossible not to get wrapped up in that. As was for me with the San Francisco 49ers, late 80s. I don't remember the early Super Bowls, but 88, 89, they go back to back. I mean, those were my teams. In 89, the 49ers win the Super Bowl. In 89, the San Francisco Giants go to the World Series. It's like, wow, it's amazing. My favorite teams get to go compete for championships all the time. Then you realize, oh, no, that's not the case. And it's always not that easy.
Yeah, I was 7 or 8 when the Steelers won their 4th Super Bowl and the Pirates, We Are Family, Stargell Parker team won. And it was like, oh, this is what it's all about, Now the Pirates are dead to me, but such is life.
Pirates had some lean years.
Oh, yeah.
Penguins have been awesome, though.
Penguins have been awesome. I mean, that was a different whole story. I mean, Lemieux's my all-time favorite guy, and that worked out perfect because he got drafted when I was like 12 or 13, right in that neighborhood. So I just, we started playing street hockey when he showed up, and they were like the worst organization in the league before that too, much like the Steelers. But every step of the way, loved it. And I mean, like if all my buddies were going out to play hoops or whatever on Sunday, I'm still watching games all day like I do now, since I could crawl. But when I decided I had a chance to do this for a living, well, college was sort of a Blutarski experience for me. My mom worked at Pitt. So back then we got 12 free terms of college, and I used them all to get a 2.1 GPA in creative writing. So
C's get degrees, man.
Exactly. I mean, I was more of a foosball Delta Chi major than I was anything academic. So a classic underachiever, to say the least. But all my summers when I was at school, a neighbor had a really nice, small, little swimming pool business. I'd come home, Pitt got out early, would open pools like crazy, service them all year, summer long. I'd go back to school, and through my 6 years of college, he would give me a little crew, and I had my own van with like 2 dudes in it, and we'd go through the South Hills of Pittsburgh servicing pools. And he was up in age and said, "Hey, Matt, how about I sell you this company when you graduate college?" And meanwhile, I'm not qualified to do anything. So I'm like, this will make some money. I get winters off. I make my own, make my own hours. So I bought the van and the company and his list and his advice, and it worked out well. And I made some bucks, but I had winters off. Like, what am I going to do?
Watch football.
You're gonna watch football.
A bunch of football. All right. So this is where the football journey begins. And it took you through recruiting and scouting and college in the NFL, and then ESPN and writing, and of course, the pinnacle of your career, podcasting here on Peacock and Williamson next. Today's episode of Peacock and Williamson is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Make a fast break right now to the NBA playoffs because you can get a no-sweat first bet up to $2,000, $2,500 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. The no-sweat first bet has jumped from $1,000 to $2,500 now in bonus bets if that first bet that you place at FanDuel does not win. And there's no better place to bet on all the playoff action than America's #1 sports book. NBA, NHL playoffs. We've got Major League Baseball. Taking a look at NFL. You can bet on tons of NFL props already for the 2023 season. They've got weekly lines already. Week 1 through, I think, all the way through the season. You could bet on weekly games. Super Bowl. Who's going to win the Super Bowl? MVPs, reception leaders. How about rookies of the year? Bijan Robinson, 3-1, 4.5-1 for Bryce Young. CJ Stroud is 9-1, as is Anthony Richardson. Jahmyr Gibbs, 11-1. Jackson Smith-Njigba, 14-1. That's the top 6 there for offensive rookie of the year. Defensive rookie of the year is Will Anderson leads the way, 4-1. Then 7.5-1 for Jalen Carter. Tyree Wilson, 9-1. Devin Witherspoon, 10-1. Christian Gonzalez, Lucas Van Ness, and the list goes on. So find all of those odds in the NFL and every sport at FanDuel. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and get a no-sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. So you had the pool business, but football's there for you in the winters. So how did football steal you away from your own? I mean, for being a 2.1 student, creative writing,
right.
You're doing okay for yourself if you graduate college. You've already got your own business going.
That's what I thought, and frankly, that was like my 6th major because some of those other classes and curriculum want you to go there before 11 a.m. And it's like, get out of that program. Right.
A detour through Peacock's journey here.
Yeah, I'm interested.
I went to school. It took me 10 years to get my bachelor's. I was playing in bands and I was bartending part-time, and then interning here and then kind of taking time off there. And trying to be practical. I was like, I'll be a business major. And my first accounting class, I was like, this is not me. I cannot do this. And then I found the broadcasting major and I was like, okay,
cool.
Nice. Yeah. And so I actually did broadcasting and do broadcasting. And I know a lot of people that had a broadcasting major that don't do broadcasting. And I know a lot of people that had a writing major and don't write. So at least you got in on that too.
Yeah, people are like, oh, you had this all along. You thought about, you're going to be a writing major and you'll write for ESPN for 10 years. I'm like, no. I mean, that just is because it was the easiest path to get a degree is the only reason I did that. But I guess I wrote better than some scouts and whatnot. I mean, I can formulate sentences.
Right. You practiced writing for a long time.
Exactly.
More than 4-word sentences.
Yeah, with a bunch of Milwaukee's best at my dorm room or my fraternity room, But anyway, I mean, so I started donating time in those like for 2 winters. And the biggest thing I did was I just donated a whole season with Duquesne. And I organized all their recruiting tape and watched it all, which wasn't much. People aren't sending recruiting VHS tapes to Duquesne left and right. I would film practice. I mean, those guys back then, like Jim Sweeney, remember the name Jim Sweeney? He was a center for the Jets and Steelers at the end. He's a Pitt guy.
You went into coaching?
He was our O-line coach, and they paid him $1,000 for the year. Like all the assistants got like $1,000. He didn't even cash the check, but our defensive back coach drove a bread truck and didn't show up very often. So I would coach the defensive backs that day, not that I had any clue, but like
did Jim Sweeney end up coaching Fresno State?
That I don't know. I'm not certain about
that was coaching.
I don't
Fresno
think so.
State as a kid. And I'm just learning that Duquesne is in the Pittsburgh area. I mean, it's college, but had no idea where it was.
You wouldn't. I mean, Lee Bodden was a guy that we were there. He played in the league actually, which was amazing. They had anyone in the league while we were there. But anyways, at Duquesne, we hired a new offensive coordinator who was on Pitt's staff, and he comes and says, Matt, you'd be perfect for my old job. There's a recruiting assistant GA position now open at Pitt that I just gave up. So he recommended me, and I beat out a bunch of people, got the job, and came home to my wife who made all this possible and is the best human being on the earth because she had a good job and we didn't have kids, and said, hey, hon, what if I make 91 cents an hour at Pitt and I'm never home and I take this pool business and flush it down the toilet? What do you think about that? Well, go ahead, Matt, give it a shot. And so that's when I became officially a football person only,
the real hero in this story.
No question, no doubt about it.
Unbelievable. And to go back to our conversation in last week's mailbag, when the question was, how do I get into scouting? This is how you do it. You're lucky if you get 91 cents an hour, probably 0 cents an hour to start. You got to donate your time, and you got to spend a lot of time away from home.
Yep. And so at Pitt, we would get 50 VHS tapes a day, and I would watch the majority of them, and scouts would come through, and I'd stick my nose in there and sit in the back of the room or pick their brain when I could. And we had successful seasons. We were bowl games. It was Antonio Bryant's last year at Pitt and both of Larry's years. So we went to 3 straight bowl games, beat Phillip Rivers, beat Steven Jackson, lost to the Brickashaw Ferguson's Virginia teams. And then our wide receiver coach, we had a really good, Bryant, Larry, our receiver coach was very well thought of, and he got the head job at Akron and said, hey, do you want to drive up the street with me and be the director of football ops? And I took it and didn't love it, to be honest, because I wasn't doing football things. Director of football ops at the college level is, I watched recruiting tape, but it was like making sure kids got in the right classes, and I organized the travel to Penn State. I'm like, I don't really like this. I'm not,
too much administration, too much operations, and
right. But like LeBron used to come to our games because his buddies were on the Akron team, and he was a rookie, I think, for the Cavs. He was at St. Vincent St. Mary's the year before. And we had this relationship with the Browns, which are only like half hour away. And they're like, well, we're looking for an entry-level scout. You know anybody? I'm like, yeah, I do.
No guy.
I know a guy.
Goes by the name of Williamson, and I'll clean the pools in the summer if you need me.
I'll do whatever you want. And I beat out a bunch of people for that job and spent 1 year with the Browns that was unbelievably not successful on the field. I tell my buddies that was Ben's rookie year. It was Roethlisberger's rookie year. The Steelers were 15-1, and my year with the Browns, we went through 3 head coaches, 2 GMs, and everybody got fired.
Wow. So a year for a scout or a front office person, timing wise, is very different for a year that probably most fans think of with the NFL calendar. So what was a year for you in the NFL? Like, when did it start? When did it end? And how did that work timing wise through drafts and off-season work?
So here's like the best way to think about it is the day I was hired was the day after they drafted Kellen Winslow Jr. So, that's when the scouting cycle starts. And I was let go the day after we drafted Braylon Edwards, by Phil Savage. And I learned a lot from him, but I knew we were all getting canned, basically. 90% of the staff was gone, and Romeo had taken over for Butch Davis. And so I drove back to Pittsburgh that day and didn't know what the heck I was going to do.
Was there an opportunity for you to fight to stick on the new staff, or was that not even an option?
I would have. I was in the war room, and people listened to my reports, and I spoke up, and maybe if I would have blown their doors off, but I think the answer is no. I think there was like 1 or 2 guys that were retained, if any. And actually, one of the people that came in behind me was Daniel Jeremiah. He may have had my office. I don't know.
That's really funny. And the scouting world and then, the podcasting world colliding there before anybody knew what was going to happen with the podcasting world there. So that's interesting.
That's next. Yeah.
Daniel Jeremiah came in and stole your office in Cleveland.
Maybe. So this is interesting too, is not to go too into depth, but you can Google the name if you care. But his name's Jeremy Green. He's Dennis Green's son. He was the director of the pro side with the Browns. And like everybody else, he got fired. And he had this great connection with what was not yet ESPN people, but as a group called Scouts Inc., including Todd McShay. And he's like, Matt, you're on the street now. Do you want to start doing stuff for Scouts Inc.? I'm like, great. And back then there weren't scouts really in the media doing things. There was like 6 of us, and ESPN bought out the entire company, Scouts Inc., hired us all. So my first day with ESPN was the same as Todd's and Jeremy as well. And he's gotten into a lot of trouble since then, but that actually worked to my advantage. And they started this thing called a podcast. They had 2 NFL podcasts. They had this one I showed you, ESPN Football Today. It was 5 days a week. Jay Soderbergh, Pod Vader had a ton to do with it. Jeremy was the original host. And then this other one by this character named Matthew Berry. They were started like the same day, the famous fantasy ESPN football. And one stuck around and one didn't. One lasted about 10 years that I was involved in. And again, that's kind of one of my regrets. And not that we failed it, but back then, nobody wanted to touch podcasts. Like ESPN.com said, that's not ours. ESPN Radio's like, that's not ours. And they couldn't figure out how to make any money with it. We were the biggest NFL podcast in the whole world. Like, we would get an email on Tuesday, like, here's the car wash. There's a bunch of NFL players. Do you want any of them? Like, nah, we're busy. Or, Barry Sanders is going to stop by. Do you want them? Sure, I guess. I mean, it was unbelievable. We had a monopoly, but frankly, ESPN couldn't figure out what to do with it. And Jeremy was the original host and started saying, hey, do you want to come on every Friday and preview games? And then it was, how don't you come on every Friday and Monday and review and preview games? Then he got himself in a lot of trouble. And they said, hey, Matt, why don't you take this thing over with, a variety of co-hosts? Robert Flores was one. Ross Tucker was one. And this is how old it is. They asked Ross, I'm paraphrasing, would you like to do a podcast with Matt Williamson? At this point, I'm writing, at least a weekly column on ESPN.com too. And Ross is like, yeah, Matt does good work. Seems like a good dude. He's also a PA guy. But what the heck's a podcast? Meanwhile, Ross has his podcast empire now, right?
Yeah, broadcast. He has his own, podcast network, basically.
Exactly. So I remember him saying, "It's like I have no clue what a podcast is, but Matt seems like a good dude. Sure, I'm interested."
It's unbelievable, and in the early days of podcasting, working with old media companies, I was always very frustrated by that. By like, are you guys?
Amazing.
I wanted to slap people. I was like, come on, you guys in the suits, don't you recognize what's happening here with this podcasting?
Right.
Nobody wanted to recognize it, and then all of a sudden, now all those same companies are chasing us and chasing what the podcasters have been doing for decades
now. I mean, this sounds crazy, and maybe I'm 100% wrong, but I truly believe if ESPN would have looked at football today, just like they did Matthews, I would be a multimillionaire still doing it with the biggest NFL podcast in the world. I mean, I think that's possible. I mean, I was first. We were first, right?
Williamson and Ross Tucker.
Yeah.
Football podcast at ESPN.
They just didn't see it that way. Yeah. And now the podcast is totally gone. And I guess there's a couple episodes on YouTube, but that's it. And even if you Google it, there's like nothing to be found on it. It's almost like ancient history, gone.
All right. So that's how Williamson ended up at ESPN. That's the start of the podcasting days. Next, how did we end up here? I do want to thank everybody once again, though, for making Peacock and Williamson your first listen every day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Shout out to the everydayers. We've got mailbags coming up. We've got our series it's our summer series this year. We're going to do all division teams, go through every division and put together an all-star team of each division and we'll find out which division has the best squad. And of course, you can find Peacock and Williamson on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcast.
We're gonna have to lay some ground rules for that too. I mean, the wheels are turning on that project. It's gonna
be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So what year are we talking? What year did you first podcast, Matt?
Oh, I'm so bad at this. That's why I describe it as I was there for Ben's rookie year. I was there for Antonio Bryant's last year and both Larry's years. I mean, I guess I can figure it out.
I know that the first time I ever podcasted, shout out KSFS. It's the San Francisco State radio station. I graduated in 2007 in the spring. So it was the fall before that. 2006 was the first time I ever podcasted. And we were doing, college radio show. And I was doing one music show and one sports show. And I remember breaking down the Kevin Durant, Greg Oden NBA draft, the 2007 NFL draft. And I was completely shocked that the Oakland Raiders didn't draft Calvin Johnson. I was like, this is the most Al Davis player that's ever existed. They're not going to draft Calvin Johnson. They're going to draft the quarterback. That ended up being a huge bust. And so that was the first time I ever podcasted. And it was still so new that we actually, our group of us that did the sports show, we actually taught what podcasting was to one of our classes because the professors.
Wow.
Yeah.
Nobody knew what they were. I mean, it was like cutting edge stuff, and there wasn't all these apps to download them. I mean, it's bonkers. So while you're saying that, I just searched. I mean, this is how my mind works. I just searched Ben Roethlisberger on Wikipedia. So it was his second season. So that was 2005. So that was my first podcasting experience was 2005, and I've done 75% of the days since then. I've recorded a podcast, if not more.
I want to go back really quick to the Scouts Inc. thing. Was Scouts Inc., were they trying to sell their services to teams, sort of like the National Scouting or the Bledsoe, what is it called? There's those scouting
Bledsoe, yeah.
Kind of old school that I don't even know if those exist anymore. Is that what they were trying to do before ESPN bought?
Don't know. They were a bunch of scouts that got let go, and there was, some people in charge, and they sold it to ESPN for a bunch of money. And that was a coup for ESPN because people didn't have former scouts. I mean, that was a big thing is we have former scouts writing articles for us. And I will say that's where the creative writing thing did help because my editors would be like, the rest of Scouts in can't write a sentence. And you're the only one that I don't have to edit the crap out of it. These guys just write like fast, two words like they're in, WVU's film room. Just
right.
jotting
Exactly.
things out. Right.
Just get the point across.
Right.
Yeah, you're actually writing real articles for ESPN.com as well as doing the podcast thing at this point.
Right. Exactly.
So
it was great.
How'd you go from ESPN to the Locked On Podcast Network, Matt?
Yeah. So David Locke, I'm sure everyone knows who that is at this point. Shortly after I got let go, got in touch with me and said, we have this really successful NBA Locked On network, and we're thinking about getting into NFL, which sounds crazy now because we're Locked On so broad and does so many things. How would you like to be our founding host for the NFL side of things? And you'll be Locked On NFL and you'll be the host. I'm like, sure. I mean, it sounds interesting. David, you seem like a good guy. I don't know much about you, but I want to keep podcasting. And, and frankly, I made very little money. We didn't have any subscribers at that point, but it grew and turned into what you and I are doing. And that's been quite a while ago, to be honest with you. Yeah.
Yeah. I believe my first Locked On paycheck was $12.
Yeah, it's about right.
And eventually eventually I was making more money podcasting than at my regular radio gig. And, was able to go dive in head first to podcasting, do it every day, do multiple podcasts every day. And so it's really cool. Shout out to David Locke. For those of you who don't know, the namesake of the work is called Locked On because David Locke, he's the play-by-play voice, radio voice of the Utah Jazz. And he started doing Locked On Jazz. And he's like, this is pretty cool. Let's let me recruit some friends and we'll get every NBA team going. And then kicked off the NFL side. And so you started probably about 6 months before me because you started before the season in 2016, right? And then I jumped on in the off season, January of 2017, doing the 49ers show. Okay. And when I started, I was like, am I crazy? I'm going to do a daily podcast about one team every day, starting in the off season.
That's a challenge.
But
I do these Steelers shows. It's hard to talk about one team,
but you know what? The NFL never sleeps, and you get the draft, and there's always something going on, and it's pretty amazing what the NFL, the kind of content you can pump out in the NFL every day. And been doing it here with you for a while now, and it's been a really fun ride. And I jumped on with you for the first time when we started doing because the 49ers show was going well, and David put us together to co-host the mock draft special, the first one of those network-wide mock draft specials, which was
4 years ago. Yeah, it's more than three.
We've done at least four of them. It might have been 4 drafts ago. So 2019 draft maybe was the first one.
I'll buy that. Yeah,
might have even been 2018.
It could have been
20.
When you get to be 50, you start thinking it's foggy.
Yeah, and then shortly after that, I ended up co-hosting the Locked On NFL show with you. So
yeah, exactly. And then I was
on your recommendation, so I appreciate you. We wouldn't be doing Peacock and Williamson together if you didn't recommend me after the mock draft special is jumping on as your co-host.
Yeah, we had good chemistry, and you were a great front man, and worked out perfect. So we've had a blast since.
Absolutely.
And I've written for a ton of websites since ESPN, and now I'm really dialed in with the Steelers, as everyone knows, which is great. So I mean, couldn't have done it with all my family and especially wife, and it's been tremendous. And I haven't worked a day in 25 years.
Oh, dude, that's what I always tell people. I am always working, and I'm never working.
Yeah,
I know exactly what's going on at all times with every team in the league, and be prepared to do a show. And it's not work because you're talking about sports. So it's amazing. And Pittsburgh boy made good. You write articles for Steelers.com, right? You cover the Steelers. You talk about the NFL for a living. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah. I mean, I'm very fortunate and had a lot of help and took advantage of a couple situations. And don't be bashful. If you see an opportunity, attack it with all the vigor in the world. And again, people ask me like, how many hours a week do you work? I'm like, I have no clue, because if I were a doctor or whatever in my free time, I would be reading and watching NFL. So, it's just, I happen to do it all the time.
Yeah. You get to say, sorry, honey, I'm working, and turn on the football game.
Yep. Thursday night. Don't bug me. Sunday night, right. Got to go to work.
All right, everybody, let Williamson know. Give him a happy birthday message at Williamson.
Thank you, everybody.
NFL
Thank you to the
Twitter.
fans too.
And Matt's always fun doing the show with you. So happy 50th to you. Hope you have a great time with your birthday on Tuesday.
I appreciate it, and not really my style to have a whole show talking about myself, but you only turn 50 once, and it's a downtime of the year, so we'll tell a little story.
We'll do it again when you turn 100.
100, yeah, maybe every 50 years or so we'll do this.
When podcasts really take off.
Maybe we'll be able to monetize it. ESPN might be able to figure out how to monetize it by then.
All right. All right. Yeah.
Thanks, what could have been, yeah.
Thanks. Oh man, you had the most popular NFL podcast in the world. Thanks everybody for making Peacock and Williamson your first listen. Back tomorrow, right here, Peacock and Williamson.